Presentation of the 2024 Monitoring Report. My name is Ann Wilkinson. I'm a limnologist and civil engineer at EOR. During this presentation, we will provide an introduction to the 2024 monitoring effort, discuss 2024 climate trends, and then discuss the results of the monitoring effort per lake management district, including lake results, stream results, effectiveness monitoring results where applicable, and recommendations. We'll finish the presentation by making conclusions from the 2024 monitoring report for the entire watershed district. For monitoring season included 3 different types of monitoring: lake monitoring, long-term stream monitoring, and BMP effectiveness monitoring. 11 lakes were monitored for surface water quality, and 6 of those lakes were additionally monitored for internal loading assessments. The stream monitoring includes 6 long-term monitoring sites that are monitored for flow and water quality parameters. 2 sites were included for the BMP effectiveness monitoring: County Road 50 Iron Enhanced Sand Filter and the Sunrise River Highway 61 Wetland Restoration. For climate trends drove the water quality conditions across the watershed district. The plots on the left look at the annual precipitation, monthly precipitation, and temperature compared to previous conditions and historical references. The top plot compares annual averages broken out by seasons to dry, normal, and wet conditions. The middle plot looks at monthly precipitation compared to historical reference points, and the bottom plot looks at monthly temperature compared to cold, normal, or warm conditions. 2024 represents a wet year preceded by a warm winter and 4 years of normal to dry conditions, which led to runoff with high loads of pollutants that had built up within the watershed in prior years. In 2024, the spring and summer months exhibited high precipitation levels, followed by a dry fall. The winter and spring were warmer than average, followed by an average growing season leading into a warm fall. This extended the growing season, meaning longer periods of favorable conditions for algae blooms and aquatic plant growth. These few slides demonstrate the water quality plots for the lake results that will be discussed in the coming slides. Each dot represents one sample. A navy triangle represents water quality collected in 2024. The light blue triangles were collected in 2023 and provided as reference. The black dots were collected from the bottom water and correspond to the secondary axis. The growing season, June through September, is shaded in tan. The navy line represents the 2024 seasonal average. The green line represents the 10-year seasonal average, and the red line represents state water quality standards for each parameter. This slide represents the second plot that you'll see for each lake in the 2024 monitoring report. This figure shows the growing season average by year for each parameter. Each dot represents the annual growing season average. The vertical line represents the variability in the sample collected during that year. The dark green area represents the growing season average concentrations where water quality is not meeting state standards. Conversely, the light blue area represents the growing season average concentrations that are meeting the state water quality standards. The first lake management district I'm going to talk about is Bone Lake. This plot looks at Bone Lake water quality for 2024. Overall, TP was below the standard. The chlorophyll A was above the standard for most of the growing season, and the Secchi depth was right near the standard in 2024. Long Lake is showing improving long-term water quality trends. TP and chlorophyll concentrations were similar to recent years, and Secchi depth has improved from 2023. The 5-year average water quality parameters are meeting state standards, and the 5-year TP average is meeting district goals. Overall, the 5-year water quality average is better than the 10-year water quality average for all water quality parameters. Stream data was collected for the inlet and outlet of Bone Lake. TP and TSS concentrations at the inlet were below the state standards. TP and TSS concentrations at the outlet exceeded standards. However, this was driven by 3 sampling dates, which were higher than the representative for the rest of the sampling period or the in-lake concentrations. This data is possibly anomalous and should be corroborated with future years of data. The second lake in the Bone Lake Management District that was monitored in 2024 is Moody Lake. In 2024, TP concentrations are exceeding the standard throughout the growing season. Chlorophyll and Secchi are near the standard throughout the growing season, however. We also evaluated internal loading conditions for Moody Lake. The alum treatment conducted on Moody Lake continues to work. However, bottom phosphorus concentration have increased. The internal load mixing after the fall turnover has caused an increase in the surface water total phosphorus conditions. For long-term trends, Moody Lake is still showing improving trends. The 5-year average water quality improved compared to the 10-year averages, and the 5-year water quality averages are meeting state standards. The recommendations for the Bone Lake Management District are as follows. EOR recommends to continue to collect bottom water samples on Moody Lake to further evaluate the internal loading conditions. We also recommend to collect follow-up sediment cores from Moody Lake to evaluate the alum treatment effectiveness. The second lake management district we would talk about for the 2024 monitoring report is Forest Lake Management District. The first lake that we evaluated in 2024 in the Forest Lake Management District was Keewatin Lake. Long-term trends show improving water quality. Historic water quality averages are meeting state and district goals. The 5-year averages show improved water quality compared to the 10-year averages, and 2024 data was similar to recent years. Shields Lake is the second lake in the Forest Lake Management District that was monitored in 2024. 2024 TP and chlorophyll concentrations were above the state standard. Secchi depth was near the state standard during the growing season. We also evaluated internal loading on Shields Lake. The Shields Lake alum treatment continues to work, but the effectiveness seems to be waning due to increases in the bottom phosphorus concentration compared to previous years. However, the high growing season averages are not driven by the internal load, as Shields Lake was stratified through the entire growing season period, and there is evidence that high concentrations were coming in from external loading, corroborated by one grab sample that was taken at the Shields Lake Inlet, which showed very high phosphorus concentrations. Although 2024 was a poor water quality year for Shields Lake due to unprecedented loading from high runoff, Shields Lake is still demonstrating significantly improving long-term trends. The 5-year water quality averages improved compared to the 10-year averages. The 5-year water quality averages are meeting state standards and district goals. Water quality in 2024 was worse than in recent years, but improved compared to the most recent wet year, 2019. The last lake in the Forest Lake Management District that was monitored in 2024 was Forest Lake. I will break up the different basins and go over the results for each in this presentation. We'll start with Forest Lake West. In 2024, TP was below the standard during the monitoring period. The chlorophyll concentrations were above the standard for the second half of the growing season due to algae blooms in the late season. Secchi depth was right near the standard throughout the growing season. For long-term trends for Forest Lake West, for all water quality parameters, both the 10-year and 5-year averages are meeting state standards and district goals. The 5-year average is better than the 10-year average for all water quality parameters as well. The next basin I'll talk about is the Middle Basin. In 2024, TP was within the state standard. Chlorophyll A and Secchi exceeded the state standard during a late season peak of algae blooms. The first dose of the alum treatment was applied in September of 2023, which reduced the bottom phosphorus concentration significantly. Additionally, sediment cores were collected in the Middle Basin to evaluate the effectiveness of the alum treatment. These sediment cores showed a 60% reduction in the orthophosphorus release in the Middle Basin, showing that the alum treatment is working as expected. The second alum treatment will be applied in fall of 2025. The long-term trends for Forest Lake Middle Basin, the 5-year average is better than the 10-year average for all water quality parameters, and TP has improved compared to 2019. 2019 was the most recent wet year and is often used as a benchmark throughout this presentation to provide some context of what improvements could be seen compared to previous wet years. The next basin is the East Basin. In 2024, total phosphorus and chlorophyll was above the standard in late summer. The Secchi depth was right near the standard throughout the growing season. Although 2024 seemed to be a poor water quality year, it was similar to recent years on Forest Lake East Basin. And both the 10-year and 5-year averages are meeting state standards. The 5-year TP average is also meeting district goals. The 5-year average is better than the 10-year average for all water quality parameters. We also monitored the outlet of Forest Lake for our stream monitoring program. We did observe increases in TP and TSS loading compared to 2019. This is likely due to the unprecedented loading from the watershed experienced by a wet year preceded by dry years. However, Forest Lake Outlet only had one exceedance of total phosphorus compared to the state standard. In 2024, we evaluated the effectiveness of the County Road 50 Iron Enhanced Sand Filter. The Iron Enhanced Sand Filter was constructed to address polluted flows generated from the Washington Judicial Ditch 6 that discharged to Forest Lake, the third basin. This table shows the TP, orthophosphate, and TSS loads removed from the Iron Enhanced Sand Filter. Overall, the Iron Enhanced Sand Filter performed better than the goals in the feasibility study in 2024. Our recommendations for the Forest Lake Management District are as follows. Collect bottom water samples from Forest Lake East and Middle and Shields Lake to further evaluate internal loading conditions. Collect sediment cores in Shields Lake to evaluate alum treatment effectiveness. And consider diagnostic monitoring in the Shields Lake subwatershed to determine possible sources of high external loads. Currently, DIY monitoring is planned for the Shields Lake subwatershed district, which will be coupled by grab samples as elevated concentrations are observed by the DIY monitoring. The next lake management district we'll discuss is Little Comfort Lake Management District. The first lake that was monitored in the Little Comfort Lake Management District is Nielsen Lake. Nielsen Lake was monitored in 2024 as the MPCA is considering it for TMDL development. Water quality for Nielsen Lake exceeded the state standard for all parameters. However, it did show some improvement since 2017. The next lake in the Little Comfort Lake Management District that was monitored in 2024 is School Lake. TP concentrations in School Lake were above the state standard throughout the growing season. Chlorophyll and Secchi concentrations were below the state standard. Long-term trends for School Lake showed that chlorophyll A and Secchi conditions were similar to recent years. TP was worse than recent years due to high concentrations in the middle of the growing season. The 5-year historic water quality averages are meeting state standards and district goals. The 5-year water quality averages improved compared to the 10-year averages. Little Comfort is the last lake in the Little Comfort Lake Management District that was monitored in 2024. 2024 total phosphorus concentrations were above the state standard from June till August. Chlorophyll A and Secchi conditions were near the state standard. Little Comfort Lake did show signs of increased bottom phosphorus concentrations, but this increase in phosphorus did not affect surface water. The long-term trends for Little Comfort Lake show that chlorophyll and Secchi conditions were similar to recent years. TP was higher than recent years and similar to 2019, driven by high concentrations in June, similar to School Lake. The 5-year averages show improved water quality compared to the 10-year averages. The 5-year water quality averages are meeting state standards. We also looked at stream monitoring at the Little Comfort Inlet. Concentrations at the Little Comfort Inlet exceeded standards sporadically for TP and TSS throughout the spring and growing season. However, the overall seasonal flow-weighted mean concentration was slightly below the state standard. Little Comfort and TP TSS loads have decreased from 2019. The recommendations for the Little Comfort Lake Management District are as follows. The 2024 results from Nielsen Lake support the continued nutrient impairment, and the MPCA should consider it for TMDL development. Second, bottom water concentrations should still be evaluated for Little Comfort to further evaluate internal loading. The last lake management district included in the 2024 monitoring report is Comfort Lake Management District. Comfort Lake in 2024 showed TP concentrations meeting the standard, except for one extremely high point at the end of June, driven by high precipitation at that time. The chlorophyll concentrations exceeded the standard at the end of the growing season, and the Secchi depth was near the standard throughout the growing season. Comfort Lake showed signs of increasing bottom phosphorus concentrations. However, these concentrations had no impact on the surface water quality. The long-term trends for Comfort Lake show that 2024 was worse than recent years. However, both the 10-year and 5-year averages are meeting state standards. The 5-year and 10-year averages for TP are also meeting district goals. The 5-year average is better than the 10-year average for all water quality parameters. We also monitored the inlet and outlet of Comfort Lake for our stream monitoring program. The TP and TSS loads from the inlet have decreased from 2019. The TP and TSS flow-weighted mean concentrations at Comfort Lake Outlet exceeded the water quality standards. However, similar to the Bone Lake Outlet, these concentrations were driven by 3 sampling dates, which were higher than representative for the rest of the sampling period, and were not observed in in-lake concentrations. This data is possibly anomalous and should be corroborated with future years of data. The Highway 61 wetland restoration project was included in the effectiveness monitoring for 2024. The project modified an existing ditched wetland complex located downstream of Himes Lake at Highway 61 culvert. The table above shows the TP, Ortho-P, and TSS load reductions achieved by the BMP during 2024. Overall, the wetland restoration performed better than the goals in the feasibility study for TP removal and only slightly underperformed for TSS removal, meaning a 70% removal instead of the projected 73% removal. This difference is within the expected range of performance. The recommendation for the Comfort Lake Management District is to continue to collect bottom water samples at Comfort Lake to further evaluate internal loading conditions. District-wide goals for the 2024 monitoring report are as follows. Although 2024 was a challenging year for lake water quality, 5-year water quality averages still show an improvement on 10-year water quality averages, and long-term trends are also favorable. A wet spring and summer preceded by several dry years likely led to high loads which deteriorated water quality. The influence of the wet spring on water quality was more prevalent in lakes with smaller surface areas than in larger lakes. There was no evidence that current management practices installed in the district were not performing as expected. In fact, effectiveness monitoring at the County Road 50 iron enhanced sand filter and the Highway 61 wetland restoration projects demonstrated that management strategies performed higher than expected. 2024 only represents 1 year of data. The district will continue its robust monitoring program to provide evidence-based adaptive watershed management. Thank you for your interest in the 2024 monitoring report.